Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Thank you for joining me for this little update that I wanted to do of some interesting news that came out from the Americans about US troops being in Ukraine. This is for the first time the Americans have actually admitted that US uniformed soldiers are on the ground in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, a lot of people were talking about this. A lot of people have, kind of hinted towards this, but not really a confirmation of sorts came out from anywhere. Interesting part about this whole thing is that this communication was done through a media channel as usual. Just a small article that came out and which said US admits that there are some troops in Ukraine. The whole story which has been put behind it is something I will discuss with you. I will also talk to you about why. Why now? There has to be a reason for this communication. Let's try and kind of piece together the stuff which is happening around for us to see what exactly is happening. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Akash, who's just joined us as a new member on this video. And of course, yes, please check your subscriptions, like this video so that it reaches a larger audience. Check the bell icon so that you get more notifications about my videos as soon as they come out. And of course, yes, if you can, do contribute to the Dev Talks efforts with the ways mentioned below your screen now. Let's get into this story. Uh, you know, the question now, US troops are there in Ukraine. Washington Post reported this. There's been a couple of articles that have been put across by the Washington Post about why, what is the reason, and this and that. So the reason that is being given is that the US troops have gone in as weapons inspectors, if I may use that term. Weapons inspectors in the sense that US has given a huge amount of military aid to Ukraine in terms of weapons, in terms of systems, in terms of a whole lot of other things which have gone through, and the US is putting some soldiers on the ground to ensure that those things are not being misused, being lost, or end up in the black market. Now, if you guys remember the video that I had done about the Ukraine war update, it's a little longish, but I wanted to put across a lot of things that were happening in that particular video. You can actually check it out where I actually show you certain, dark web pictures about these weapons that have been available. The question we need to ask, this has been a suspicion for a long time. As a matter of fact, there have been reports about a US made HIMARS system, which has also gone towards the Russian side. This is somewhere in April or something like that that came out. So these things have been on. Why now? Why is the US admitting now to the factor that these guys are in Ukraine? That is something we need to ask ourselves. There's a lot which is happening in the US at the moment. Today morning, we saw the Fed has actually increased the rates by another 75 basis points. That's a large increase for the first time since 2008. That's an interesting thing that we need to remember. Of course, one of the things that we need to see is that the economic situation at the broad end in Europe and America is quite teeterous. There are issues which are propping up. Joe Biden is going in for his midterm election, so there's going to be political pressure because of that. Another big thing that we know is that there has been some sort of a communication compromise between the communications of US and UK. Now, how do I know this? The Russians suddenly seem to know ahead of time in terms of some stuff which is happening, and they've been able to counter that narrative pretty well. There have been reports widely going around about Liz Truss's phone being hacked. Before that, Ben Wallace rushed to uh, to America to meet his colleagues in Washington without giving a reason, and this was on a day of a parliamentary committee meeting, something that he couldn't have avoided. And remember, this was the time when all that tamasha of Liz Truss was happening. So there is some sort of there seems to be some evidence of communication compromise which have happened in that particular region. And my personal opinion is that if there has been a communication compromise and the Russians are probably aware of these US troops being in Ukraine, they would probably put it out in order to save the embarrassment of anything of that sort happening. I think the Americans have themselves come out and said, there are Russian troops in Ukraine, but the cover story, in my opinion, that has been given is the factor that they're inspecting the weapons. As a matter of fact, if you read the Washington Post article and if you want to search for it, you can just say US troops in Ukraine, Washington Post. You'll be able to get 2-3 articles that are there. The purpose which has been put across in the article is that the dizzying amount of weapons that have been sent to Ukraine, the US wants to keep a tab and ensure everything is going to the right hands and ensure that nothing actually ends up in the black market. One of the things that they have mentioned is that till now they have found no evidence of any sort of pilferation of that sort which is happening. They've actually given details with regards to how they should actually monitor, how the Ukrainians need to monitor the serial numbers and this and that and the other. I wonder how much of that is actually possible in a hot war sort of a scenario. It's a quite an interesting article where they've spoken about serial numbers of javelin missiles, of this and that and the other. But as I said, during a hot war where the US troops which are based in Ukraine on in a sense of anonymity have told Washington Post that this is a red hot war. So it's an interesting couple of events which are happening. I'd like to also connect this to the some big attacks that took place from the Ukrainian side on towards the Russians. The first one, of course, was the Nord Stream. The second one was the Crimea bridge attack, which are pretty big attacks in themselves. And the third one was the big drone attack that allegedly took out one of Russian naval ships, which happened recently. It is interesting if these soldiers were actually doing weapons inspection or directing Ukrainian efforts as advisors, which US normally does in terms of all these wars, towards these particular attacks using munition and supplies that are a little high end in nature, which probably the Ukrainians without training would not be able to handle. That to me seems like a little more plausible scenario, coupled with the factor that there is some sort of a communication compromise that has happened. And instead of the world getting to know from somewhere else, put out a silent story with a cover that they have gone in for weapons inspection. What is happening in Ukraine is very interesting. Of course, lights are out. Cities are being talked about, getting into evacuation mode because there's going to be no sort of services which are available in some of the major cities. As a matter of fact, Kiev lost a lot of the water supply. There was a talk about 80% of it. I'm sure the Ukrainians are repairing it as we speak as well. But the kind of missile attacks that we are seeing from the Russians are pretty hard. Yesterday itself was a devastating day. About, I think, yesterday and day before yesterday, 2 days combined together, very heavy attacks on critical infrastructure. Some other news is that the Russians now say that 87,000 troops, and I reported about 41,000 the last time I did my video. 87,000 troops are now, which were mobilized, are now in Ukraine. That's all I had to say. This is a short little update with some questions I wanted to ask about the timing of the news where US says that their troops are there in Ukraine. One of the things, again, we must ask in this war, because of the whole fog of war and the narrative campaign and the propaganda that is going around, is why? Why and why now? And where is this news coming from? Because you will see a lot of our Indian media also, teetering on one side or the other in their particular reporting. We need to take a balanced perspective, not favoring Russia or Ukraine or the West or anything like that, to figure out what actually is happening on the ground, because that is the ground reality of the situation. Before I sign off, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for trusting me with your time. Of course, yes, like, subscribe, bell icon, and yes, if you can, to help out the Dev Talks efforts. I will come back to you probably in the afternoon with some big event which is either happening now or going to happen, with an update as to what the relevance of that particular event is. As I said, I will try and do more of these short updates so that I can keep in touch and have more amount of videos going out for you. We will keep on doing the Dev Talks interviews where we are talking about larger issues with our experts, and I'll catch up with you with General Shankar this evening at about 10 o'clock at night. Till then, Jai Hind.